Welcome back to Kansas City. Today we're going to talk about some light history and how the ACA has accelerated level funding around our great nation. For those of you who've been in the business for a little while, you still remember a time before the Affordable Care Act. Now, the Affordable Care Act was less about care and less about affordability than it was about regulation of the fully insured insurance marketplace. What the Affordable Care Act said is that we have some problems inside of the U.S., and we're going to try to address them instead of with freedom or with responsibility. We're going to address them with legislative fiat. With that, the effects of the ACA are paramount. We have seen, since the passage of the ACA, a more than tripling of Americans' medical cost. So you could say that it made care less affordable. And you also have an expansion of the number of people now that are not covered under any plan, which is less access. From my chair, the Affordable Care Act has been a massive failure from its stated goals. For level funding players, it has been one of the greatest boons in our industry because level funding does not sit under the Affordable Care Act in terms of its pricing regulation. It sits under it in terms of its plan design regulation, but not its pricing. So with that, level funding is able to still price to the reality of the marketplace. Again, insurance is for unknown risks. The Affordable Care Act is for financing of medical procedures and care, in my opinion. So the more that we get away from what true insurance is, the more you get into an area in which you have massive fourth type of spending problems and massive amounts of inflationary trend inside of the system. Now, how did that actually come to pass? Well, there are four primary drivers, and I'm going to go from the most prolific driver of the ACA and the inflationary trend to the least and the most insidious on the bottom. Number one, the first part that really drives inflationary trend inside of the ACA is a thing called guaranteed issue. Inside of the ACA, it says it is a group of the willing. If you're willing to come down, we'll figure out a way to finance and pay for it. Well, that's not how the real world works. If you have a group of people that has $1 million in claims and one that has zero in claims, what you've effectively done is you've subsidized those that have extremely large claims at the expense of those who are extremely healthy. Because the chronic disease epidemic in the United States has expanded so massively in my lifetime, it's gone up by around 60-fold. You are now seeing more and more maintenance medications that are prolific and everywhere. If you see it advertised on TV, realize that is at least, in general, at least a Ferrari payment. Now, the Ferrari may be used, but it's a Ferrari payment if you see the drug on TV. Why are you seeing so many more drugs in the United States consumed as opposed to anywhere else? Well, because we have effectively made it free to the member or very, very cheap to the member while billing society through the insurance pool. But there is no free ride, effectively creating a private party tax that's done through corporations through the fully insured marketplace. It is a type of empathy that bankrupts entire societies. There is a question at the bottom of all pools of capital. And if you do not even ask this question, you will not get an answer that is anywhere acceptable. And the question goes somewhere around this. Now, this is deep and heavy, and I apologize because this is a short video, but we're going to go into it. Is it moral for a father to bankrupt himself to take care of the needs of his child? I think the answer to that is yes. Is it moral for a family, an extended family, to do that? Probably. Is it moral for the town that they live in, for the child, to force the bankruptcy of every member of the town? Probably not. How about for a nation state? We have never even asked that question as a country, and because of that, we have weaponized empathy so that people always want to say yes, and then they blame some intermediary institution, which happens to be the insurance company, for the expanded cost, when the expanded cost is bared through expanded coverage and care. Now, I want to be very careful here. I am all for medical innovation. But if we do not have an answer to that question, you can see how the ACA actually incentivizes malicious actors to develop new treatments and cures that are extremely expensive, that would not be developed in a regular marketplace, that target very, very small amounts of people. And then they use the motivation of the minority to pull value out of the disorganized majority. Not to get too deep into that, but you can see how that shakes out. Number two, in terms of the ACA's big changes, is a 3-to-1 rate compression based on age. Now, this one is a little less defensible than the first. The first, you can make the argument of a morality. This one says that we are not, as the fully insured model, able to charge a 65-year-old what they actually cost. We have to charge them a maximum of 3 times what an 18-year-old costs. Now, that may sound like a big difference to people on this educational video, but the actuarial difference is somewhere around 7.5 times. So what it has done in practice is that it has made it much more expensive for young, healthy people to participate in the pool at all, and has subsidized the older, sicker people. Now, there's one other additional caveat here, and I am not a socialist. The young people tend to be very poor because they're starting off in their career. The old people tend to be very wealthy. So what you've done is you've transferred money from the young and poor to the old and wealthy. Now, in my book, that's backwards. Now, there's an organized majority with the older people, and there's disorganization around the young people. Okay. Level funding does not have to play with that. Much like level funding does not have to play with guaranteed issue. Level funding goes back to reality and says the actuarial slope is somewhere around 7-1. We will price for the actuarial slope. Additionally, level funding says we are going to price to the actual members of this group. We're not going to say everybody's a collective. We're going to price to the individual group itself. Number 3, in terms of the big shifts of the ACA and how it deviates from reality, causing a massive opportunity for level funding in small group, is the shift from community rating to industry-based underwriting. Now, the ACA said that the community rating is everybody who, no matter their lifestyle, no matter what their job is, we're going to treat them the exact same, even if the risk from that position is much, much greater or less. Think about the lifestyles of someone who is an accountant for accounting firms, as opposed to a fin fisher in Alaska who digs uranium ore on the off season. There's a significant difference in the risk of those people's lifestyles as expressed by their choices of occupation. Now, that is an uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth nonetheless. So when you deviate from different situations and say, we don't like the fact that people have different outcomes based on their own choices, we're going to try to go away from those choices and make it everybody is the same. What you do is you subsidize the poor choices at the expense of the good ones. The fourth is a thing called minimum loss ratios inside of the fully insured model. Now, why would that be a bad thing, Tom? Why would it be that 80% of the money that comes in for a fully insured carrier has to be paid for claims? That seems like a good thing. Well, they have a minimum annual required amount of cash to pay for their staff, their buildings, their legacy investments. So what is it that they're going to do? They are now incentivized, instead of to control costs to serve the client, they're now incentivized to raise their prices because of the minimum loss ratio. It is backwards. If you're trying to control costs, what you've actually done is increase the incentives to increase price, which is silly. You've also set up a situation in which the fully insured carriers are now trying to game around some artificial parameter. And they, at least in my opinion, some of them have done this through the manipulation of their PPO contracts and through delayed billing and delayed bill editing so that they can play with that loss ratio over time. Again, let's say they're morally defensible at the outset. The effects of these pieces of legislation create disturbances from the market that force inefficiencies that drive massive cost. And if you don't believe me, and then your answer is, well, the cost would have been higher if it wasn't for the ACA. If your defense of a system is it would have been worse, that is admitting that it is already bad. So with the ACA and level funding, the reason why level funding has seen such growth in the last decade is because of those primary 3 drivers. 1, we can still underwrite. We price to reality, not to what people want. 2, we price to the actual risk of the industry, not to what everybody's the same risk across all the board. That's not the truth. And 3, in level funded plans, again, we price these based on the actual reality of the members going into this group. This is why census changes are such an important part of the small group underwriting process. It's not just their age. It's their age and their individual health statements and questionnaires that allows our underwriting to price this extremely accurately and be more close to the reality of the situation rather than being blind and subsidizing the competitors. Those are the 3 big shifts that have seen massive growth for level funding and the deep defenses as to why a more transparent and a more shaped of reality marketplace drives costs down, not up. Now, people say the economics of healthcare doesn't work in the United States. No, they work. What doesn't work is the organized minority against the majority. And what this system does is it incentivizes those that are taking from the system to be very, very organized. And it makes the other parties go to sleep. But because costs have gone higher and higher and higher, the cost of napping, so to speak, is becoming cataclysmic for small business owners. If you want to keep fighting for Main Street, keep watching. We'll talk. And if you have other questions on this, if you disagree with me, please reach out. Talk to you in a bit.